Township Planning Commission will come to order. Would you all please rise for the pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As far as the agenda tonight, we do have an addition. Please, under the chair's report, we need to elect a new secretary. So please add that under the chair's report. Which leads me to the first topic, Mr. Steve Lemoyne, our secretary for a number of years here, probably on the Planning Commission for upwards of 10 years, has moved on, and we're going to miss his service. And I would please to have a motion that recognizes Steve for his contributions to our Planning Commission and our community.
So moved.
We have a motion from Brian, and second from Jay. Call a question. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Steve, thank you for your service. Are there any other changes anybody would like to make to the agenda beyond that which I have noted? Hearing none, I'll move to the first topic, which is the approval of the minutes. We have the minutes from March 4th, 2019. Does anybody have any comments, questions, or concerns regarding these minutes? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve as submitted.
So moved.
Motion from Eric, support.
Support.
From Jim, I'll call a question. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Lori, as usual, great job.
Thank you.
Next item is public comment. Anybody wishing to speak with the commission? Not on the topic's not on the agenda. Seeing no one in the audience, we'll move past that. No, I don't think so. Okay, we will move now to a pre-application conference, rezoning, and a condominium development proposal. The applicant is Mid-American Investments, Post Office Box 128 of Grosse Ile. Representing Mid-American Investments is Mr. Ron Palmer, and that is on behalf of the owner, the Grosse Ile Golf and Country Club. The location for this property legally are Club Properties Association subdivision, lots 13, 14, and 15, along with a very small 25-foot parcel of Grosse Ile Supervisor's Plat number 39, which is owned by the Country Club. The common description, in simple terms, is 3 lots along the west side of Meridian, immediately north of Hawthorne Glen, and this is almost opposite Rucker. 3 vacant lots at that location. The proposal involves rezoning 4.8 acres from single-family residential property, which is R1B, to multifamily R2. And in that R2 multifamily district, there would be 7 residential units constructed. 4 would be in one building, which would be along the edge of the Grosse Ile Golf and Country Club, and 3 would be on the interior of the property. The zoning for this is R1B, which is single-family residential, but because it is vacant property, there's an R1E overlay, which requires a bigger lot size for single-family residential development. The rezoning is requested because 7 units would not be allowed under the R1E district standards. The process, in order to handle this application, is multi-step. First, there's going to be a land division and a reconfiguration of the 25 feet which belongs to the Grosse Ile Country Club. That would have to be split off from the main parcel and added to the 3 lots that I've just previously discussed. At that point, then, the rezoning would take place from single-family residential to R2 multifamily. And then that would be followed by preliminary and final site plan review for the residential development itself. There are multiple ordinances that are involved in this process. The highlights are Article 19, Section 19.22, which is lot splits and consolidations, and then Article 25, which is amendments to the zoning ordinance, and then Article 21, which is site plan review. Also, in parallel with this, for administrative reasons, we would also need to modify our zoning map at the same time. So that would be something that the Planning Commission would also address. The process, because of all these different steps we have to go through, different ordinances standards, there are multiple steps that involve both the Planning Commission and the Township Board. Without getting into the gory details of that, I'm going to jump right to why we're here tonight, and that's because we're here for a pre-application conference. The purpose of this is for the applicant to present at a high level what they would like to do and to receive initial feedback from the Planning Commission on what we think about it. And there will definitely be no vote on this tonight. This is strictly for communication. I should point out that there have been 2 concept review meetings with the Planning Commission officers with the applicants on this project. And the purpose of these 2 meetings was to facilitate their understanding of what the zoning ordinance requirements actually are, so that we're all talking from the same page. There were no opinions rendered by the officers in these meetings regarding the project. It was strictly information. So, on that note, normally I would turn the discussion over to Brian Borden, who would give a somewhat more detailed view of this project, but due to a scheduling conflict, Brian is not here tonight. So we will move here to the applicant to talk about the project. And if you have questions that would normally be directed to Brian, please keep them simple and direct them to me. The key word here is simple. So on that note, I will stop. And who's presenting? Is it Ron? Are you presenting? Oh, okay. We have Mr. Ron Palmer, who was on the application, and Mr. Rick Bowl, who has done a lot of the planning and architectural work on this. So these are the 2 gentlemen that the subcommittee met with in the concept review meetings. So I will turn it over to you now. I know you have a presentation for us, so please take it away.
Thank you, John. John did an excellent job of summarizing the process we've been through. I'd like to thank Lori and Brian on initial meetings. They honestly gave us a lot of insight and explained very carefully how R2 would be amended in such a way the density could be adjusted, so it wouldn't be a true R2. Also, then the subcommittee meetings, we've been able to fold in most of the feedback that we've gotten while it wasn't directed. A lot of it flowed into the presentation you're going to see tonight. So tonight you're seeing a summation and overview of all the meetings that we've had since last October.
Mr. Palmer, I'm not sure exactly how loud that's coming through on the television audience. Could we use the hand mic, please?
I don't know if that's working. Did he get it working? Test, test. I think he was struggling with this.
Okay, I guess it doesn't work. I guess there is a fixed mic up there, isn't there?
There is, and I can lean a little. This raises?
The whole table.
The whole podium raises.
Oh, does it? If I break it, I'm going to...
Yeah, before you...
Ron has buttons to do that.
Yeah, it'd be nice to get this squared away before you give your presentation.
Oh, the magic button.
Isn't that fancy?
Is this presentation?
We may take it to its limits there.
We might. It still might not be big enough.
That's it right there.
All right.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Is that better then?
That's much better.
Okay. So what we're going to do is present the summation and overview of the entire project. Your choice. You can interrupt and ask questions as you go. Lots of times I feel better that way, so you don't think about, oh, I got to ask that later. I think it'd be nice just to interrupt and ask a question as we go here if you don't understand. So what we did, we have a name for it. It's multifamily. It is on Meridian. It is the golf course property adjacent to Hawthorne Glen. and adjacent on the east side of the Grosse Hill Golf and Country Club. So, Rick, you want to do your little magic?
Next slide.
Oh. And I guess this is what John explained. We were requesting a rezoning with agreement of the parcel of land located of Meridian just north of Hawthorne Glen. When we built Hawthorne Glen, we called it an island within an island. And the reason we did that is because you have the soccer field and airport to the south of Hawthorne. You have the golf course to the north. And pretty much it was entitled. At that time, the land was vacant on Meridian. So this was an area that was very isolated, and we thought that was a good title. So that's still the case. Excuse me. Where's the button? Okay, this is your overall island. And Rick has isolated the area, and then we'll do a blow-up.
So there's our vicinity. Look at, we've got a pointer.
All right, so let's do the blow-up of it. So you can see the R1D, and you can see the Hawthorne Glen area, which is adjacent R2. That was originally rezoned. That was an old farm that was rezoned to R2. The density of R2, you're familiar, is 5 units per acre. We actually ended up building less than 3. We were very concerned with the land. We used the terrain, we used the water, we used a lot of different things. And so Hawthorne Glen was developed with R2, but almost amended without being amended. But you can see the lots on this drawing, the project site. Let's go to the next. I think that helps. Oh, this is some of the history. Okay, it's 40 years ago, guys. I'm standing here, and Rick and I were the original people that designed and did this 40 years ago. We were just talking about that in the room. And this is the island within an island. Excuse me. You can see the original site was R2, which I talked about. And we've fallen well below the R2. We're asking basically to take a phase of Hawthorne Glen that was originally designed in 1980 and ask for approval on that. Let's look at that slide, Rick. Okay, what we're going to do is show you an overview. I'm going to cheat. Can you go to that last slide?
Sure. This one or the
very last one.
All right. Sorry about that. Whoops.
Okay, this one shows it best. You can see the outline on your screen. You see the property on the upper side, and then you see the white line around Hawthorne Glen. So you can see this area. Hawthorne was developed. You can see the lake that was put, Lake Raymond we put in, some of the retention ponds. We dealt with the drainage, and then we had a request from a lot of members around the golf course, and that's what happened with this particular land. This land, we've had a lot of requests from members of the country club that would like to retire. Hawthorne Glen has been very amazingly successful as far as meeting the community's needs. So let's get back to that very one with the project. Keep going, one more. Okay, this so you know, in our infinite wisdom, in 1980, you can see proposed future development phase 8. This was always planned to be a phase of this project. The reason it wasn't completed, there was an overview and the township agreed. The reason it wasn't completed, the board at that time elected not to sell after we had a contract because they were afraid of expansion on the golf course. They have to add a tee, adjust the course. So we basically let them out of that contract. But this was the master composite plan. And you can see R1E also at the other, get that pointer here. You can see this is where we're at, we're talking about here. This is where we also did the same thing. We took R1B lots, we added it to the development, and we actually developed that. And there's been no impact to those residents on that side too. Okay? And this is where I get the rest.
I'm Rick Bowl. I'm the project architect on this project, and this is an overview of the site. And I think what's key to look at here are the property lines. This is Hawthorne Glen to the south, Meridian to the east. And this shows the lot's fairly heavily wooded. If you look at this line right here, it's a little bit darker. These are the mature, older growth trees that I think are the critical ones in the site that our goal is to save these. There's a high canopy overhead, there's not much brush underneath, so these are nice trees. In the middle, we've got some newer growth that are not quite as important, and then up along this edge there are some older trees. And I think if you take a look at this slide, one of the other key things is there's a drainage way that goes like right about in here, and you'll be able to see that on some of the later drawings. This is a residence to the north, and these are the existing Hawthorne Glen buildings to the south. And this is our proposed site plan. We're talking about a road that comes in off of Meridian. We've got 4 units that face the golf course in this area, and there are 4 condos with individual garages. And then there's a motor court in front and some parking. And then we've got 3 units that are facing this open space between the development and Meridian. And then we're proposing a road extension that's not really a road. It's paved, it's grass pavers, if you're familiar with that. They're concrete waffles that are basically, you've got grass that goes over. So it looks like lawn, but it will support a fire truck or a construction vehicle if need be. The density here is we've got 7 units. The site has got 21,000 square feet, so the density that we've got is 7 units, which is this, let me say this correctly, it's the same density as if this site was developed R1E.
Square footage wise for the size of the lot for R1E.
Correct.
Rick, it might be interesting to point out, the fact that you show the road stopping at the property line there, but in fact there's a road that matches up to it from the
Correct.
south.
Let's go back to this slide here.
I think that's important to point out.
Yeah, the intent is that grass paved area would be right in here, and it would be attached to this driveway of Hawthorne Glen, and the purpose of that is for emergency vehicle access.
And let me just share with you, I have met with Hawthorne Glen on a couple of occasions. They do not want us to connect via a normal paved area. They do not want a throughway, so that anyway, all residents would be going through their area in front of their units. So the solution for us, and I've talked to various people, is to put in an area so it look natural, but in an emergency, they could go over it and connect, because they just do not want through traffic. They're adamant about that. So we're working with Duncan, we're working with, I think Rusty is the other fellow we'll be working with, and we'll work with that association to get those grass pavers in their side too. But that has not been approved at this point. What they don't want is a throughway, and I understand that. There'd be a lot of traffic going through their area. So, because originally we honestly were going to use the main road and connect, but instead we went with a private drive.
It's good. This slide, the purpose of this slide is to kind of show you that here's the Hawthorne Glen existing development. This is our proposed development, and then here is the R1B as it continues along Meridian to the north. So we're trying to show here that the units, the way we've got them sited on the property, is kind of a natural flow of the buildings as they move around the golf course. And this is a fairly effective transition between the R2 development and then the R1B that's to the north, because as I said before, the density is the same as if it would have been developed R1E. A question came up at some of the pre-meetings is what are the materials and what are the buildings going to look like? The intent is that we're going to duplicate the buildings that are in Hawthorne Glen, or very similar. The outside materials would be siding, brick wainscot, probably update the siding materials to something a little bit more current. Other than that, the buildings would pretty much match what's existing Hawthorne Glen buildings.
The only thing, when you look at the picture on the left, we've been asked, and Rick and I have verified, that the garages would all not be facing forward. so that they can be turned in such a way that you wouldn't be driving down the road and see nothing but garage faces. And that was pretty easy for us to do. According to Rick, it was very difficult. But
Yeah, exactly.
we got
Hours and hours
to
worth of
figure
work.
it out, right?
Yeah, I believe the way the ordinance reads is that 25% of the buildings have to have a garage that is not facing the street, and we've been able to accommodate that.
And two things that did happen in addition. The road we had originally was a private drive 20 feet wide. It was recommended that we go to 24. We were able to do that. The other thing that was recommended is to go to the minimum parking. And so we had not a lot more, but we had additional parking in there. So we restricted the parking to the amount that would satisfy the development, but also not impact the site itself.
Yeah, by doing that, we cut down on the amount of paved surface area, which I think is a plus. Another one of the issues that came up at the pre-meetings was, are there any wetlands at the site? The slide that you've got in front of us is a print-off from the MDEQ Wetlands Survey, and it's current. It's dated January of 2019. The key is that the brown area is wetland soils may be present, and then the green area are identified wetlands. So if you look down in the lower right corner of the drawing, there are definitely some wetlands there. Here is our site. There are no identified wetlands, based on this current survey. This is the drainage way that I was talking about earlier that goes through the front of the site.
And we've done a lot of evaluation of this. DEQ, DPW, there is a manhole situated to the north corner, and we're basically, and then Rick has got it identified. He's connected that if we were to pipe. The township actually went in and cleaned out a retention pond for Hawthorne itself. They cleaned all that out. It was probably in the Frenchman Street back by the airport, I believe, but they also went into this site and they cleared out that area because I heard they broke the railroad block tile, whatever it was, and took some trees down. So that site has been cleaned out that way. The restriction, right now we're carrying water in that site. There's two reasons we feel. Somebody dug a ditch years ago. It's a little mini retention pond, so there's water there. And there is a restriction on the Hawthorne property with one of the culverts that we've talked to them about, and we would assist in having that removed. It doesn't block it totally, but it slows it down, so it filters slowly, and I've got videos of that too. So,
yeah, the intent, if you look at this site plan, is to pipe that swale, picking it up on the north side of the site, and then continuing it to the existing drainage way that goes through Hawthorne Glen.
but it is an open area and needs a lot more evaluation to be dealt with to make sure that it's not an issue. May take some soil borings to make sure the soil is adequate. So we've been preparing and working with Todd and others to make sure we get that information.
I apologize for jumping around here on the presentation. Ron, do you want to address this one?
Well, this is pretty much straightforward. These are the three lots at the bottom of the site, 13, 14, and 15. And what John talked about is there's a 25-foot strip. We do not understand exactly why that didn't connect to the line at Hawthorne, but that's the piece that needs to be broken off of the main lot. In reality, we'll probably be separating those in three lots and that 25 feet. Work in conjunction with the country club. Well, they'll do that simultaneously as we go forward with our application and have that separated off. So that's the plan at this time. Yeah, this is just a blow up of the same thing. It shows the 25 feet. And this shows that culvert. That area is literally an excavated area that sits there. We don't know how it got done. Nobody seems to know, DPW and so forth. But it's literally carries water. Years ago in 1976, I built a home on the same stretch, one of the R1B lots. I put ponds in the front, literally, and they carry water all year round. So water flows through this area, and we're going to vinylize how that works.
You're going to what? Finalize?
We're going to, before we come forward with you, we'll have a solution and an identification exactly what is going on there, because it's just not clear to anybody.
We included this slide. This is basically the three lots. There are three lots of record currently, so they could be developed R1B. And this would be a typical R1B development. And we included this because as the number of iterations that we've gone through to get to the final site plan, developing at R1B really would almost clear-cut that entire piece of property. You'd have the development area of the residences themselves, and then you'd have the drive and the utility access. So this tree area that we're attempting to save that's down in here, if it were developed R1B, we're not proposing that, this was just a study drawing, really would wipe out most of the trees that are on that lot. So the intent of this is to show that we really feel that the proposal that we've got is a better use of the property and saves more trees.
And if you go back to the slide that showed where Hawthorne originated, we saved that whole front section. We didn't develop it. And the reason was because of all the mature hardwoods. And there's an old bridge in there, concrete bridge and so forth. So we didn't want to destroy that area. Well, we feel the same way. If you look at our site plan, it maintains a lot of the hardwoods that are existing. And when you compare it, it's much less intrusive to the property.
You want to tackle this? You want me to?
You're doing fine.
This is kind of a response to the section of the ordinance. There are 13 bullet points that the ordinance talks about reviewing for an R1B with amendment development. And we didn't go through all of them, but we kind of attempted to summarize that those high points that we feel that the site, the way we're proposing to develop it, has got an equal density to what the current development would be at R1E. And we've got a greater amount of trees that we're able to save with this approach. And we've got a really nice transition between the existing R2 development of Hawthorne Glen and then the R1B zoning that's to the north of this site.
I drew that last slide then. So again, if you look at this slide, this will give you a flavor of what we're talking about doing in total, but you can see where how do I do this? Okay, you can see where we put this in Old Frenchman's Creek connection here. There's a retention pond here. See, that comes back through here. So we've even talked about putting the water out here and having a little retention pond up. So there's a lot of options on the water, so forth, as long as this ground is buildable. If not, we'll be pulling this back and moving this back and having this more open if that's what's required. But that's something at this time we don't feel it has, because in the past it hasn't been necessary on the land to the south. And so we're optimistic that that won't have to be the case, and it'll be uniform around the original plan. Any questions, I hope? Any input, thoughts?
I think next steps are fairly important. I know you mentioned it about basically an environmental assessment on the site in order to get everything squared away, whether it's woodlands, wetlands, anything that might be on that property that's relevant to either our ordinances or your development gets well defined before you come back to us actually with a firm proposal. So everybody knows we're on a firm ground.
Internally, literally.
Literally, yes.
Yeah. We've internally planned on a tree study to accommodate that. We've looked at all the trees we'd have to take. We'd modify the site, the way the road would come in and so forth, so we don't take any mature trees out. The water we're going to deal with and drainage. Rick drew it in. We had to have something. We felt, working with Todd and so forth, that this would work, but that doesn't mean it is the solution. Probably do some soil borings, to be honest with you. We'll be looking at all the options. How do we connect to the additional existing drainages? And we'd like to understand more clearly that whole manhole/collection point, because it looks like water comes in there from several locations and feeds off into Hawthorne or into the Frenchman's Creek. So we need a clarification of all that, but you're absolutely right. That's the plan before we go forward.
So we will get all of that, including a wetlands assessment, formal, and so we'll have a good base to work from.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important to talk about your timing.
Well,
what are you hoping for?
I'll start this way. Did a purchase agreement with the country club, had 90 days. I said, why don't we add a few months? Because probably it may take longer. We're a month over the end of the contract, so obviously
you're a month over?
We're a month over what we planned in the worst conditions. So, and I'm not being facetious. I'm saying the reality is this has been a good process, it's been a healthy process, but it's longer than we originally had thought. I think at one of the subcommittee meetings they thought, I mentioned fall, we got a feedback of maybe 10% chance. So I think at this point, if we could do something and get it completed by late fall, so that we could either get something in the ground or early spring is kind of being realistic about what would happen.
Okay. Yeah, recognizing that some of these individual steps we are not the final decision maker on, has to go to the board, and then it has to come back, and you know, as we process this, we will try to be as efficient, you know, as we can, and combine things where we can, so that we have a logical flow.
And be honest with you, we haven't, I've had initial discussion, but the country club is going to have to go with this on the lot splits and things like that, because if they're not simultaneous, you got to let all that happen, then we got to go forward. So we're hoping we can combine. Brian is optimistic that it can be done, so we'll just have to see how we do.
Okay. Well, let's see if there are individual questions. Where should we start? Dan, how about you? Any questions or comments on the project at this point?
The one question I normally ask to Brian, but he's not here. Maybe you have some insight on it. But I was wondering how common it is for the township to rezone portions from single family to multifamily residential. This last development was done 40 years ago. I'm just curious if it's been common in the last decade or so.
Well, I've been around not quite 40 years on the Planning Commission, but you know, I can state, and you know, we've discussed this with the applicant. Rezoning is very uncommon. Okay, it basically, outside of the R1F zoning district that we, as a Planning Commission, created for Hickory Island, there hasn't been any. So rezoning is not a path we've been down for a very, very long time.
I think that the answers that we gave back, and you heard it, I think, at another presentation in March. The market is changing in Groseal. There's a certain need for certain types of housing. This tends to fill right now. There's literally almost bidding process going on for these units to pop up because there's a demand. Does that mean you should not rezone that type of thing, or should? I can't say that, but the market itself, if part of the deal is to service the market, you need to develop more units like this on Groseal. I mean, I heard where there's going to be 25,000 people years ago too, then on the island, how are we going to handle it? The island hasn't grown much. And so the utility-wise and that type of thing, we don't see any burden. I remember I was asked to put in a 12-inch water main when we did the main project, and I connected to a 6-inch on West River. I said it didn't make any sense, but there was this grandiose idea that there was going to have to be less density. The reality is, I don't think in this case, because also we're meeting the R1E square footage, this is not impacting the community in a negative way.
I think another point to make here is, even though we haven't been down the path of rezoning, there is a path. You know, it's in the ordinance. The criteria are clearly laid out. You know, the 12 or 13 points that are in the ordinance that you mentioned earlier. So we know how to get from here to there. The fact that we haven't been there, I think we just simply have to process the application, look at the standards, and make decisions. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
The only other thing I could mention too, this particular site is difficult to do R1B because of all the issues of utilities, access, and also it's so long and deep that the club has been trying to market this for over almost 3 years. There's no market at this point. Anybody gets into this site, it's very difficult to handle the costs associated with these particular lots. One of the ordinances does allow for some financial consideration. So I think that's one of the things we did present at one of the subcommittee meetings, and we had a letter from the club indicating they just haven't been able to get a market going. So that's one of the things that was considered in our subcommittee.
Brian?
One question I have is, have you considered bicycle and pedestrian connectivity? Specifically looking at the connectivity of these new homes to Hawthorne Glen, to Meridian Elementary, as well as the bike path? I would.
That's a great question. The answer is, I can say there's been no verbalization of it. I can go back when we did the project. We were asked to buy Meridian School. I mean, the schools were shutting down some facilities. I remember when Mans came to me and said, we're going to sell that school. The reality is, it would be very easy, and I think Hawthorne Glen would be very cooperative in connecting back to that. Now, the rest of the R1B, I'm not so sure what they would do. But it'd be worth evaluating. We'd be willing to take that forward and ask the question if some of those residents would consider that. But you do have a bike path on the other side.
Yeah, we have a bike path on the other side, and there's a sidewalk that goes up to the the southern point of Hawthorne Glen's driveway currently. So there's a sidewalk that connects directly to Meridian Elementary.
I think it's something we should really consider, and I'd be willing to take it back to the Hawthorne people and see what they say.
Thank you.
Jay?
Appreciate the presentation and the work that you did with the officers in kind of pre-application discussions, and I just wanted to kind of acknowledge the fact that these gentlemen have been very accommodating of all the comments and suggestions. It's clear that they're taking those into consideration. I do think we always have to consider the impact of a change like this. I think we don't have a history of this, and I think a big history of these rezonings, and a big part of that is it's increasing the density of the population potentially next to somebody else, and I always go back to anytime I think about a development. Does this change the impact on the neighbors, in an unfavorable way? I think the work that you did with us in pre-meetings indicates a willingness to mitigate any negative impacts, and it actually, in some ways, I think gives maybe a better impact than would otherwise be if these were developed as R1B properties. So I just wanted to suggest that there is room for additional discussions. The point of this is really just to say that for our fellow commissioners, if you have suggestions or questions, I can tell you that these gentlemen have been very accommodating of the suggestions and questions we've had up to this point, and encourage you to do those.
Thank you, Jay. You mentioned neighbor. We have had feedback through another individual, not directly with a neighbor. He says, do me one favor, get rid of that goddamn water. Because what happens, that ditch is retention pond, and it sits there all year. And so you get your mosquitoes and so forth. So he's anxious. And he is a developer of his own kind. He does a lot of things around the area. So he didn't have anything negative per se directly adjacent. Hawthorne, other than that through traffic, they had no issues at all.
Thank you, Jay. Mr. Davis.
Thank you. Once again, I echo what Jay had mentioned. Great process. I was a part of the subcommittee. I appreciate the natural look, the natural feel, using less pavement, leaving the mature trees. All that's been great. I appreciate it's going to look like the other homes in the area, so the condos that are existing there. And then we talked about minimizing parking once again, and you guys have made changes as well. So even in the subcommittee, we were talking about like how the headlights are coming into the neighbors and whatnot. Always trying to think of, as Jay mentioned, the neighbors. So great process. The thing I do have here, once again, it's already been mentioned, is the rezoning. The fact that we haven't broached this yet, but it doesn't mean we can't. But obviously, we'll have to make sure we take due care when looking at that. So, but thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Ranka.
I guess one question I have is you've got 7 units proposed. Certainly the land could fit many more than that. Why is the magic number 7?
That's a good question. The reality is when I did Hawthorne, I'm very proud of how it turned out. We've always maximized the community. I live here. I'm a member of the country club. I would say this could be developed with 20-some units. It's not necessary to economically make it work. If I were strictly doing this from a financial perspective, I would go for a lot more. We're right at the edge. We can't do much less and make it work, be honest with you. But it's because of my involvement. I'm 74 years old. I'm not looking to reinvent the wheel. This is a project I'm doing with my boys. I'm looking forward to doing that. And all the elements that they're going to experience will be there with this quantity of work. And so it's the quantity of, we're going to leave a site that'll be continuation of what we did in the 80s and be very proud of.
Ron, if I could also add just a little perspective, is in some of the pre-meetings that one of the suggestions was that this would probably be a a more easy process, not to say easy, but an easier process, if it were kept to the same density as the R1E overlay, which would give 7 lots. And so there's no, in my mind, that was a kind of a push towards 7 instead of 8, but or more,
It's a good point. I think we had a purchase agreement for 8 units. We paid a different price, to be honest with you. That wasn't the driving factor for us. The reality is, Rick came up with this several months ago. He says, Ron, R1E, we're so close. He says, that would make sense. The configuration of land doesn't allow for R1E. But we wanted to meet these ordinances as much as we could. And so this particular density did meet that.
Thanks. Yeah, no, the only other opinion that I have is that, it's been addressed a couple times, right? We haven't done the rezoning. Doesn't mean that it's impossible. Doesn't mean that it's warranted. It doesn't mean that it's not warranted. Certainly, I think we can all recognize a desire for the condominium style, right? Not just on Grosse-Ile, but in a lot of different areas as well. So I'm not opposed to walking down that path if that's where it takes us.
Thank you. Mr. Rato.
Okay, so a couple things. One, you didn't say anything about the size of the units that you're proposing. You said they're going to look like Hawthorne Glen, but are you talking 4,000 square feet units, 2,000?
And we're using the very similar floor plan, the layout. If you notice the building sizes, it is pretty much the same. The square footages on those units did vary, somewhere between 1,600 and 2,000 square feet. 1,800 is kind of the target size. So that's roughly the size that seems to work. The key was a master bedroom down. That's what most people wanted. But they don't want a large condominium. This development wasn't built around that. So no, they're going to be very similar in size and taking the same square footage as additional units in the past.
Okay, so with that, I agree 1,000%. Grosse-Ile needs units like that. We've shied away from them off of my opinion, a direction the township board gave back in the early 2000s with a fear that we were going to develop this place beyond recognition. However, all of us at this age are looking to downsize and want to stay on the island, and I know from experience there just literally is no 2-bedroom homes available that you don't have to put a lot of money into. And
right.
To have these units available on Grosse-Ile is something that needs to happen, in my opinion, rather quickly. We need to keep people that grew up here in the homes that don't want a large home anymore, to give them a place to live in the comfort and luxuries that they're accustomed to in a smaller footprint. So I have no problem doing this in situations like this. There's one that is in front of us over on West Shore. Perfect. This one, perfect. What makes this one perfect? They're not going to sell as R1Bs.
No.
They're not. They've been for sale forever. You can't develop it. It's too expensive. And if you even found somebody that wanted to do it, if the country club sold the lots for $20,000 a piece, you still are going to clear cut the lot and just decimate that whole area to get a house up by the golf course.
I agree.
Because that's the only reason that you'd want to buy that, right, to be on the golf course.
Right.
I think taking it and making it look like those makes sense, whatever. I mean, that's a design style. It's subjective. The environmental study, obviously you guys know that's a big part of this because I know, and Ron, you know, right. We don't know what's, we don't know. That's what scared everybody off of buying those things, to put a single family home on it anyway. I think that we need to figure out how to do this based upon some of the questions of the logistics of making this happen from the standpoint of, the foundations, the water, and things like that, to move this project forward. Grosse-Ile is in need of it, and it's in need of these things now. Not all over the island. I mean, there's probably a heck of a lot more places where we should never change from single family. But this lot, I think, is a classic example, as the one over on West Shore, a classic example of something that we need to do for the need of our elderly residents, elderly, 55 plus, right?
Well, John, you're exactly what happened. We have a house on the canal, and we've enjoyed some housing on the island. It's been phenomenal. But we were looking at Hawthorne, and we could not find a unit that we either cared for and/or. So this was the catalyst why I went to the club, said, would you consider this and let me take it through this process? And then after the March, I think, 4th meeting, you guys, so somebody broke the ice. So you heard for the first time that, hey, there's some opportunities if there was some rezoning. So that was, again, the catalyst to go ahead and go forward. Although we've been working at this, it's a natural flow for me because you're taking a project that was already approved years ago and it's flowing, and it'll be a natural. Like Rick mentioned, we use cedar on the siding. That's an obsolete. So Hardy board is a phenomenal product. It'd be, have good life. It'll have similar look. We can make it very nice and aesthetically the same.
It's being proposed by a couple hometown boys that, like you said, you know what, you're not here to come in and decimate the land and try to extract as much money as you can from Grosse Ile. It's a very cool project, great location for it, and a piece of land that's nothing will ever happen to it. The country club gets some money out of it. We get a development. Everyone's happy. We move on. So that's my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr. Rathel. I will echo the sentiments of Jay and Jim. I found the one concept review meeting that I was able to participate in to be very positive. It was a good discussion, open discussion, and you have reflected the comments that the officers presented and the questions that we asked with what I view as very clear responses. And I think that speaks very well for how we move ahead with the process. Moving to the standard of having a lot density equal to the R1E density, I think is a major issue. Okay, and the fact that, in the first drawings that I saw, you went from 8 units, which did not meet the requirement, to 7 units, which did. And I think that speaks very well for how this process could move forward. We will follow the process. The things that, the standards, the 13 or a dozen standards that we have all have to be evaluated. And it's more than financial, it's more than need, it's compliance with the master plan and a whole variety of other things that we have to look at. So we'll look at, from my perspective, I will look at this thing in total and look for you to give, concise, clear responses like you've already done in our previous meetings with for each of those points, and then we'll see where it goes. And as far as the next steps, I think that we'll need to get with Brian. You'll need to get with Brian, have a talk with him about your timing and when you'll have materials available, and we will do our best to accommodate a reasonable meeting schedule so that we can progress this thing along. And again, where we have the opportunity to combine steps, we will certainly attempt to do so, again, where it makes sense.
Right.
Are there any other questions you have for us?
The only thing that, feel free, all of you, to give us feedback even after this meeting. If you have any thoughts or ideas, give us, probably coordinate through Lori. Congratulations. But we're looking to do this well, and we want to impact the community in the best possible way. So we're open to that. Like the pedestrian issue, never was mentioned. But it's something we should look hard at. I think it'd be a good idea to try and deal with that. So things like that would be very positive. There is a point, obviously, we can only do so much with the economics that we can only deal with it. The 7 actually was kind of the magic of about right where we'd had to be at least there. So that worked with the density issue, and Rick has got that figured out. So the biggest single thing I'm concerned with is this drainage issue. But I've got connected, here is not an issue, here's not an issue. I can't believe we can't resolve it.
Well, sounds like you've got a little bit of work ahead of you.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your presentation. We'll look forward to your next submittal.
Good, thank you.
Okay, we will now move on to the famous chair's report. First item on the chair's report is the secretary's election. Steve Lemoyne was our secretary, and that spot is currently vacant. We do need to have 3 officers. The primary job of the secretary is to validate and sign the minutes as the representative of the township for legal purposes and for our documentation. So, and again, if the chair and the vice chair did not happen to be around and it needed to be run, the secretary would run it. So those are the primary roles that the secretary would play. So at this point, I will entertain a motion for secretary for the Planning Commission.
I move Eric Ranka.
We have a motion for Eric Ranka. Is there support?
I support. Dan?
Dan? Okay. Do we have additional nominations?
Yeah, I move Jim Davis for nomination.
We have a motion for Jim Davis. Is there support?
Support.
We have support from...
Can't support that. You can't support that. Wait a minute. I want to see the bylaws right now.
Are we going to have a thumb war?
Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to be nominated? Gentlemen, what do you think? You both want to be
Eric
secretary?
doesn't want it.
Go for it, Jim.
All yours. I was going to support him. Someone beat me to it.
Okay, up to you guys. You want to? I prefer you guys just.
I don't want to say no to Eric, so you want to withdraw?
Yeah, I'll withdraw.
Okay. All right, then I would ask for unanimous consent for Mr. Davis to be our secretary. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Congratulations. You know, we thought you weren't going to be here tonight. We thought you'd be an easy mark to get elected. And here you are. We figured if you weren't here, you couldn't say no. Eric, thank you for your gentlemanly response.
No problem.
So you just have to sign him up on his liability insurance now?
Absolutely.
Tell him about all that responsibility that he just took on?
Quiet. Okay. Two other things that you might find or will find of interest, I'm sure. You found in your package a brief summary of a project which was in its very early concept and discussion stage, which was a restroom at Sunrise Park. And you saw some things in there that about it and about ordinance changes. This was a request that came down to us, to the officers last fall. It has since been withdrawn from consideration by the township, so that will not be coming forward. The other item which is out there is the very large development at West Shore. We had a pre-application on that, and as well as 2 or 3 concept review meetings. At this point in time, there has been no formal submittal of that application to the township. So there is nothing that we can or should be doing at this point. It's all dependent upon the applicant getting the materials and the requirements in, and at that point we'll figure out how then to proceed with that project. So the ball is in their court.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Do we know of an issue with it, or are they just working on their due diligence still before they make the application?
Brian Borden made contact with them and to remind them that we can't put them on the agenda without them applying and giving us some materials, and there's been no response. We were not asked any questions. We were nothing on our end at all. This is entirely in their court.
Interesting.
So those are the 2 things that I'm aware of that were on the docket. As far as the next meeting is concerned, I really can't tell you. I think we need to kind of sit back and see how applications or applicants drive our timing. When something comes in and I feel it's appropriate for us to meet, I will have Lori contact you. What's that, Lori?
We have maybe 2 of them. Yep, just got an application today for a lot split combination
Okay.
for Roseville Land Conservancy on Coleman. Give a little piece of property to the homeowner.
Okay. Well,
Then we have one that we did a couple months ago for South Point for the condo.
okay. Well, what will happen here is I will talk to Brian, and we'll sort out potential dates based on the content of whatever's in the applications, and we'll propose a date and see, try to get everybody lined up to attend. Is that acceptable for the time being? Okay. Then on that note, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.